But yes, and if you're implying that I would come in here and somehow shade truth in any way because of that, I would take high offense with that, Mr. Harpootlian.
I'm concerned about your high offense. Are you angry at him for stealing your money?
I have no feeling one way or the other.
I don't have any feeling about Alex Murdaugh betraying you and stealing your money. I admire you. I don't know that I could look beyond that.
The last day of testimony was full of fireworks, and I have to tell you, we're going to get into why, but I think the state lost its case on the last day of testimony with these rebuttal witnesses that they insisted on the jury hearing from, and it definitely was not helpful to the state for a number of reasons. But let's get into why. What was your takeaway from the last day of testimony at trial?
I think that they brought all these people up just basically to repeat what they had presented ad nauseum, that Alex Murdaugh lies. We already know that. And then they brought up an expert, and I say that with quotes because... Yeah,
let's put up some air quotes right there, right?
Yeah. This expert is an expert at retrieving data off of cell phones. So he understands the software of cell phones and the way that it processes information, and he can interpret that information. But the state used him as an expert to perform some experiments. And we'll show a little bit of his testimony here. But I think that if I was on the jury and I heard that, it would throw into question all of the state's cell phone evidence.
Yeah, and if you haven't been following this trial, almost 100% of the state's case is built around the cell phone data that they retrieved from the victims and from Alex Murdaugh's phones, which show time signatures for when the phones are moving, when they turn around, when they change orientation, etc. And that data saying when those things happen is how the state has kind of gone back and tried to create a timeline here of when things happen. And that's about all the evidence there is in this case. So undermining this is a huge problem for the state, and their own witness, who they insisted on putting up and testifying about this, doesn't do them any favors. In fact, I think it sinks their case completely, to be honest with you. Let's hear it.
And did you perform a series of tests with various motions and various throws with this phone to determine, and were you able to develop an opinion of when the screen might come on and when it might not?
Rule 5, this is an experiment on evidence such as infancy, and we have not been provided this.
Judgment overruled. Rule 5 does not apply.
So you did perform a number of tests, correct?
Yes, sir. I performed many tests over the weekend. I would pick it up and shake it, pick it up and throw it. I threw it off of my desk. I knocked it off of my desk. I tried to flip it end over end. I tried to throw it like a Frisbee. I did each one at least 10 to 20 times.
Okay. And were the results 100% conclusively? Did the phone do the same thing every time?
No, not at all. Sometimes the screen would turn on. When I threw it, land face up, and then the screen would turn on. But a lot of the times I would throw it, and the screen would not turn on. It depends on how the accelerometer registered that movement.
So based off of your test, is it your opinion that an iPhone of the same make and model as Maggie's could be thrown and the screen not turned on?
Can't lead the witness.
All right. Did you develop an opinion about whether the screen would turn on every time a phone was thrown?
If the phone is thrown, the screen does not always turn on. In my experimentation, I determined that when the phone is thrown more like a Frisbee, 9 out of 10 times, the screen does not turn on. The times that it did turn on most often was when I pick it up and tried to shake it, then the screen would come on briefly.
But 9 out of 10 times when you toss a phone like a Frisbee, the screen would not turn on. Right?
That is correct.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
When you performed these experiments, did you record them in any way?
I did not.
You didn't video record doing any of this?
I did not.
Did you consider video recording any of these experiments?
Actually, it never crossed my mind.
You just did the experiments and then just sort of orally relay when you could have had a video to show us?
That is correct.
If you were going to throw a phone out from a moving vehicle, wouldn't you need to pick it up to toss it?
Certainly.
And if I understand previous testimony, when you pick it up, the screen comes on.
When you pick it up gently.
Do you normally do experiments and don't record any data or video record anything?
It never crossed my mind to record video.
Do you believe that you would have to have disclosed that data if you had recorded it?
Objection, Your Honor.
Overruled.
I believe so, yes.
So the reason you didn't record data was that it would have to be produced, and then we could examine it and discover whether or not it was accurate.
No,
You
sir.
avoided that by not recording anything, correct?
No, sir. That's not correct.
Why didn't you record any data?
It did not cross my mind to video record my experiments. I just did the experiments to determine whether or not
And
the screen would
you didn't
turn on.
occur to you to measure how fast you were moving the phone, maybe to even find out what is that threshold you claim where the phone goes from turning on to not turning on? Exactly when does that happen? You have no idea, do you?
No, sir. It would take me much longer to do these experiments to determine the exact speed and force required to turn the display on versus not.
Seeing that, and this is one of the last things the jury is going to take back with them in their minds when they go to deliberate. And this whole case is based around the phone data and the time signatures and how accurate it's supposed to be. And then you find out that one of their experts is throwing a phone around in his office. And this is part of this data set. You know, this is something they're supposed to take with them and consider, oh, well, when he was throwing a phone that doesn't match Maggie's and had a completely different operating system, 9 out of 10 times it didn't register. I mean, it's crazy.
But it was the same model.
But different
phone.
operating
Yeah.
system, right? And
Potentially,
people need to
yeah.
understand.
But either way,
this
yeah.
is not expert testimony. This is a guy throwing a phone around.
Yeah, and he performed these experiments in a manner that was not the same as throwing a phone out of a moving car. That we know that if they're saying that if Alex Murdaugh threw it out of his car at the point he passed that location, he was driving at about 40 miles an hour. And the defense attorney went in and asked him several questions about statistical data. How do you calculate it? What makes these types of experiments, if you want to call them that, reliable? And you have to have various different types of tests for it to be reliable. And this was just some guy sitting in an office tossing a phone around. It's insane.
And like the judge should have never allowed this in. But even though it's in, it's even more helpful for the defense. They tried to keep it out.
I think
The judge
it's helpful for
somehow
the
allowed it
defense.
in. I have no idea. People need to understand. Expert testimony has to be based on scientifically verified data. There's all these criteria that have to be met before they can testify about things. You can't just make stuff up. You can't just say, oh, well, I was in my office one day and this happened. That's not the standard. And the fact that the judge let any mention of this baloney in is crazy, but also the fact that it was so bad for the state in the end. I mean, it was really helpful for
It
the
was
defense
horrible.
to see it, because after I saw this, now I was taking the cell phone data with a grain of salt. Now I'm just dumping salt all over that, man. I'm not even the data to me. I mean, I'll take some of the timestamps and everything. It's important.
Yeah.
But this idea that because her phone never changed orientation after like 8:49 or whatever, that's when they were killed. Baloney. You can't. Maybe, but this is pure speculation. Pure speculation.
It's all speculation.
It's very possible that these phones could have changed orientation at 9:20, 9:30, and it just never was recorded. The idea now that these murders happened within 2.5 minutes of Alex being at those kennels is blown out of the water by the state's own expert here. I think they lost the case with this last witness who they insisted on testifying. If they had just sat down and let the case conclude and go to closing arguments, they'd be in much better shape. But I think they lost their case on the last day of testimony with these rebuttal witnesses. And by the way, what did you think of the other witnesses?
I think that it was smart of them to call the pathologist because she performed the autopsy. I think that they had to call her. I don't think she stood up very well to cross-examination because there were some things that she had to admit that she didn't do because her conclusion was already made. So they didn't x-ray the brain and all these various things because she had already arrived at her conclusion. And I think that feeds into the defense's theory that they basically got tunnel vision in this investigation. They did such a bad job with the investigation that the only possible person they could charge with these crimes was Alex Murdaugh.
Yeah. I think now that we've seen all the witnesses, the state doesn't have much of a case here. I would be shocked if there's a conviction at this point. Before, I was like, yeah, I think it's probably 50-50 whether he'll get convicted. Now, the state's case was so weak and laughable. And frankly, when something kind of awkward happens a week ago, the jury's not going to remember it so much, but this is so fresh on their mind, and it undermines so much of the faith that they're asking this jury to have in this cell phone data.
Yeah.
Is now just, it's not even junk science. It's just junk. I
Yeah.
mean, and it's
No,
just,
it was-
and the jury is, I think, mad at the state. Like, the defense has been over and over again going, how many witnesses are they planning to call? How many rebuttal witnesses? For 4 weeks of testimony in a case where they just don't have any evidence, they're just beating that dead horse over and over and over. Harpootlian said something like, Judge, they haven't found a horse that they haven't wanted to beat to death yet, or something like that. I mean, it's been ridiculous. But anyway, as you can see, I need to sign off here because we've got kids at home from school today, and I'm going to be watching them for the next little bit. But we'll be watching these closing arguments. Be sure to subscribe and be sure to like us so that when you subscribe, you're notified as soon as our videos drop, because we're going to probably have multiple videos on this closing argument.
It'll be interesting to see how the state can tie all of this testimony and evidence to see if they can make sense of it. I'm interested to see how they handle it.
Their closing argument's going to be a timeline, and it's going to be based on all this timeline. It's going to be probably very similar to the timeline that you did that's available for people to download. And then the defense is going to be going and trying to poke holes in that timeline to where it doesn't make any sense anymore. And they say, look, this is one possible timeline, but there are multiple other timelines that are possible here. And to decide one or more is more accurate than the other is pure speculation, and that's just reasonable doubt. It's going to be a lot of ammunition for the defense to get an acquittal here.
Well, go take care of your kids. Have fun.
Be sure to subscribe. Be sure to like us. We'll be back after the closing arguments.